Judge Judy thought she was hearing a simple $40 property dispute, but the 90-year-old man standing before her was guarding a secret so powerful it would leave the entire courtroom in absolute silence. Before watching this emotional courtroom case review, powerful, make sure you subscribe to the channel first, comment below where you're watching from, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Now, let's begin. Powerful. What I am about to share with you was Judge Judy's ultimate verdict before she stepped down from her iconic bench, and it transformed into one of the most profound and emotional courtroom moments ever broadcasted on television. Powerful. A 90-year-old man slowly walked into Judge Judy's courtroom over a minor $40 property damage claim. On the docket, it looked entirely ordinary, a mundane disagreement. But when Judge Judy realized what this elderly gentleman had been quietly protecting inside a battered wooden box for over 50 years, powerful, something happened that had never occurred in her decades-long career. Judge Judy halted the proceedings, stepped away from her podium, and was brought to tears in front of a live audience. This was not your typical daytime television drama. Powerful. The secret hidden inside that heavy wooden box was so heartbreaking and so deeply tied to the meaning of sacrifice that it forced Judge Judy to make a ruling that shattered every conventional expectation. When the camera zoomed in on what Arthur Pendleton had guarded with his life, powerful, the production crew froze, unsure if they should keep the cameras rolling. Arthur Pendleton was not just a fragile old man with a petty legal complaint. Powerful. He was the silent guardian of something deeply woven into the fabric of American history. For more than half a century, he had quietly carried a burden so sacred that when Judge Judy finally uncovered the truth, powerful, the strict rules of her courtroom completely vanished. But the most staggering part was not just what Arthur had kept locked away. It was what the arrogant young defendant had carelessly done to disrespect it. When Judge Judy grasped the true gravity of Arthur's lifelong mission, powerful, she delivered a masterclass in justice that left everyone trembling. This became Judge Judy's final masterpiece. Powerful. The morning of the taping felt like any other Tuesday in the bustling Los Angeles studio. Powerful. The gallery was packed with eager tourists, families, and devoted fans waiting to see television's most no-nonsense judge deliver her signature brand of justice. Bailiff Petrie Hawkins Bird went through his usual motions, checking the paperwork and signaling the restless audience to finally settle down. Powerful. No one sitting in those wooden pews had the slightest clue that they were about to witness a piece of television history that would leave them all weeping. At precisely 10:30 a.m., the heavy wooden doors swung open, and Judge Judy Sheindlin took her seat at the bench. Powerful. Even after thousands of cases, she carried the same sharp, piercing gaze that had made her a legendary household name. She adjusted her glasses, looked down at the paperwork for the final case of the day, and let out a brief, impatient sigh. Powerful. The file read, Pendleton versus Carter. A minor property damage dispute totaling exactly $40. It was the kind of petty, everyday squabble she usually resolved in less than 3 minutes. But absolutely nothing about Arthur Pendleton was going to be simple or fast. The plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton, slowly stepped up to the podium. Powerful. He was a 90-year-old retired postal worker, moving with a slow, deliberate grace that commanded instant respect. He wore a faded but impeccably pressed suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his hands trembled slightly as they rested on the edge of the podium. Powerful. But what caught everyone's immediate attention was not his frail stature or his gentle eyes. It was what he carried. Clutched tightly against his chest, refusing to let it out of his grasp for even a second, was a battered, dark mahogany wooden box. The defendant, a 24-year-old software developer named Liam Carter, stood at the opposite podium. Powerful. Liam wore an expensive designer jacket, constantly checking his luxury watch, exuding an air of complete and utter annoyance. He looked at Arthur with visible disdain, clearly furious that his valuable time was being wasted over a $40 complaint. Powerful. He shifted his weight, rolled his eyes, and muttered under his breath, projecting the exact kind of arrogant privilege that Judge Judy absolutely despised. Judge Judy looked at the arrogant young man, then turned her sharp eyes to Arthur. Powerful. Mr. Pendleton, she began, her voice cutting through the sudden silence of the room. You are suing Mr. Carter for $40 in damages to a wooden box. Tell me exactly what happened. Arthur took a slow, shaky breath. He did not look at the defendant. Instead, his eyes locked onto the battered box in his hands. Powerful. Your Honor? Arthur began, his voice surprisingly steady, though quiet, powerful. This box? It was not just damaged, it was defiled. He paused, his hands tightening around the wood. It happened on the 11th of the month. I was sitting on my front porch, as I do every morning, holding this box. It is my routine. Mr. Carter here, who recently moved into the neighborhood, was backing his sports car out of his driveway. Powerful. Arthur explained that Liam had been driving erratically, blasting music, and clearly not paying attention. The car hopped the curb, tearing through Arthur's meticulously kept rose bushes and slammed into the porch steps. Powerful. The impact knocked Arthur out of his chair, sending the heavy wooden box crashing to the concrete. The box shattered, Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice finally cracking, and he just laughed. Judge Judy turned to Liam Carter. Is this true, Mr. Carter? Did you drive onto his property and damage his belongings? Liam scoffed, leaning casually against his podium. Your Honor, it was an accident. I barely clipped his steps. The old guy dropped his little toy box. I offered him $50 to fix the stupid thing, but he wanted to make a whole production out of it. It's just an old box. Powerful. The courtroom collective drew a sharp breath. The sheer arrogance rolling off Liam was palpable. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into slits. She had spent decades eviscerating entitlement, and Liam Carter was practically begging to be destroyed. Powerful. It's just an old box, she repeated, her voice dropping dangerously low. Mr. Pendleton is asking for $40 for the repair of the box. But I suspect, Mr. Carter, that you have absolutely no idea what you actually damaged. She turned her attention back to Arthur. Her tone softened remarkably, shifting from judicial wrath to genuine inquiry. Mr. Pendleton, she said gently, $40 seems like a very specific, yet very trivial amount for something you are holding on to as if your life depends on it. What is inside that box? Powerful. Arthur looked down at the mahogany box. The brass hinges were bent, and a large, jagged crack ran down the center of the lid the damage Liam Carter had caused. He ran a trembling hand over the crack. Your Honor, Arthur whispered, $40 is the exact cost of the wood glue, the brass fittings, and the varnish needed to repair the casing. I cannot ask for more, because the contents cannot be priced. Powerful. May I see what is inside, sir? Judge Judy asked. The entire courtroom leaned forward. Arthur hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, with a deep breath, he unlatched the damaged brass hook. Powerful. He slowly lifted the cracked lid. He didn't pull anything out. He simply tilted the box forward so Judge Judy could see inside. As the cracked mahogany lid folded back, the bright studio lights caught the glint of tarnished metal and the faded ink of decades-old paper. Powerful. Inside the velvet-lined box lay dozens of military dog tags, carefully arranged alongside neatly folded yellowing letters and a collection of purple hearts and bronze stars. The courtroom, previously filled with the low hum of whispers, plunged into a silence so absolute you could hear the quiet hum of the studio cameras. Powerful. Judge Judy stood up slowly, her eyes widening as she leaned over the heavy wooden bench to get a closer look. Mr. Pendleton, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, entirely stripped of its usual judicial edge. Are these what I think they are? They belong to the men of the 3rd Battalion, Your Honor, Arthur replied, his voice thick with a grief that had not faded in over 70 years. Powerful. 73 men. My brothers. We landed on the beaches together in 1944. Most of them did not come home. He gently touched a dark, blood-stained letter near the corner of the damaged box. When they fell, I crawled through the mud to collect their tags. I collected the final handwritten letters they wrote to their mothers, their wives, their sweethearts. I made a solemn vow in the dirt of that battlefield that their sacrifices would never be forgotten. Powerful. Arthur explained that for decades, since returning home from the war, he had spent his entire life and his modest postal pension tracking down the families of his fallen brothers to personally deliver their final words. But for the 22 men represented inside this specific box, no living relatives could ever be found. Powerful. So, I became their family, Arthur said, a single tear trailing down his weathered, deeply lined cheek. Every single morning, I sit on my porch with this box. I read their names aloud. I read their letters to the wind. I make sure they still exist in this world. I am their only memory left. Judge Judy stared at the contents of the box, completely immobilized. The $40 claim was literally just for wood glue and varnish to hold the wood together, but the box itself was a mobile sanctuary, powerful. It was a holy reliquary, carrying the souls, the courage, and the final memories of true American heroes. She looked up from the silver dog tags, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and slowly turned her piercing gaze toward the defendant's podium. Powerful. She stared directly at Liam Carter, the arrogant young software developer who had carelessly backed his expensive sports car into a piece of history and who had just moments ago smirked and called this sacred memorial a little toy box. The temperature in the room seemingly plummeted. Everyone in the gallery held their breath, knowing a storm of unprecedented proportions was about to hit. Powerful. Mr. Carter. Judge Judy's voice rang out, no longer a whisper but a sharp, authoritative strike that echoed off the courtroom walls. Powerful. You stood in my courtroom, in front of a national audience, and you called the memories of 22 fallen American heroes a little toy box. She pointed a trembling finger at the cracked mahogany case. This man bled in the mud of Europe so that you could have the freedom to drive your sports car, blast your music, and act like the center of the universe. And how do you repay him? With $50 and an eye roll. Powerful. Liam's arrogant posture completely collapsed. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming pale flush. Powerful. He shifted uncomfortably, suddenly acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes glaring daggers at him from the gallery. Your Honor, he stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous confidence. I didn't know what was inside. I thought it was just some old trinkets. If you had known? Judge Judy interrupted, her voice rising to a crescendo of righteous fury. Powerful. Character is what you do when you don't know what is inside the box. Character is how you treat an elderly man whose property you have just carelessly destroyed. It shouldn't take a collection of purple hearts and dog tags for you to show basic human decency. The studio audience, usually instructed to remain completely silent, erupted into spontaneous, thunderous applause. Powerful. Even Bailiff Byrd, who had seen decades of courtroom confrontations and heard every excuse in the book, wiped a tear from his eye while nodding in solemn agreement. Powerful. Arthur Pendleton stood quietly at his podium, his hands gently resting on the broken box, asking for no pity, only for the $40 to repair the sanctuary of his brothers. Judge Judy waited for the applause to die down before she took off her glasses. Powerful. She looked directly at Liam, her expression a mix of profound disappointment and unwavering resolve. You offered him $50 to make him go away, she stated, her words dripping with absolute contempt. You thought your money and your arrogance could buy your way out of accountability, but there is a debt here that your wallet cannot simply erase. Powerful. The cameras panned to Arthur, whose quiet dignity stood in stark, magnificent contrast to the defendant's shrinking figure. Powerful. Judge Judy leaned forward, the full weight of her authority bearing down on the young man. This courtroom is a place of law, Mr. Carter, she continued, the silence in the room absolute. Powerful. But today, it is also a place of moral reckoning, and you are about to learn a lesson about privilege, respect, and the true cost of freedom that you will never, ever forget. Powerful. Judge Judy's gaze remained locked on Liam Carter. The young software developer was no longer leaning casually against the podium. He was standing rigidly straight, his expensive designer jacket suddenly looking absurdly out of place in a room thick with the solemn weight of history. Powerful. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice softer now, but carrying a weight that felt heavier than any gavel strike. You look at this box and see a piece of old wood. You look at Mr. Pendleton and see an old man in your way, but let me tell you exactly what you really hit with your car. Powerful. She reached into the shattered mahogany box and gently lifted one of the tarnished silver dog tags. The studio was so quiet that the faint clinking of the metal chain seemed to echo. Powerful. This tag belonged to Private First Class Thomas Miller. He was 19 years old. He died on a beach in Normandy so that you could sit in an air-conditioned office and complain about a scratched bumper. Powerful. She picked up another. Sergeant Elias Vance, 22. He threw his body over a live grenade to save 3 other men who eventually came home, had families, and built the very country you take for granted every single day. Powerful. She held the tags up, letting them catch the light. These are not trinkets, Mr. Carter. These are the physical embodiments of a debt you owe, a debt we all owe, that can never be fully repaid. And you crushed their sanctuary because you were too impatient to check your rearview mirror. Powerful. Liam Carter looked physically ill. His eyes darted around the courtroom, but he found no sympathy, only a wall of cold, hard judgment. He looked at Arthur Pendleton, really looked at him for the first time, and the reality of what he had done finally seemed to crash down upon him. Powerful. I am so sorry, sir, Liam choked out, his voice barely a whisper. I had no idea. I am truly, deeply sorry. Arthur Pendleton slowly turned his head to look at the young man. The anger that had initially brought him to court seemed to have dissolved, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. Powerful. I don't want your apology, son, Arthur said quietly, and I don't want your $50. I just wanted you to understand that some things in this world are bigger than you. Some things are sacred, powerful. The courtroom was completely spellbound. Judge Judy, known for her swift rulings and sharp dismissals, let the silence linger. She was not just presiding over a legal dispute, she was facilitating a profound moral awakening. Powerful. The dynamic in the room had shifted entirely from a conflict over property damage to a masterclass in respect, sacrifice, and the enduring weight of history. Powerful. Judge Judy's words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Powerful. The initial outrage that had rippled through the gallery when Liam Carter first spoke had morphed into something entirely different, a profound, reflective silence. People weren't just watching a television show anymore. They were bearing witness to a clash between two completely different generations, two completely different worlds. Powerful. Arthur Pendleton stood as a monument to quiet duty, a man who had asked for nothing more than $40 to mend a box holding the souls of his fallen brothers. Powerful. Liam Carter, conversely, looked smaller by the second. The expensive jacket, the luxury watch, the aura of untethered privilege, it all seemed to evaporate under the harsh, unyielding light of genuine sacrifice. Powerful. Mr. Carter, Judge Judy continued, her voice slicing through the quiet. You thought this was about a wooden box. You thought it was about a minor inconvenience to your day. But you are standing before a man who crawled through blood and mud, so you could have the luxury of being inconvenienced. Powerful. She gestured toward the broken mahogany case. Those 73 men didn't get to come home and buy sports cars. They didn't get to live out their lives. Mr. Pendleton has spent his entirely ensuring they are not forgotten, and you treated their memory like garbage. Powerful. Liam swallowed hard, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. I want to make it right, Your Honor, he said, his voice shaking. I'll pay for the box. I'll pay 10 times what he's asking. I'll write a check right now. Powerful. Judge Judy didn't even blink. You cannot buy your way out of moral bankruptcy, Mr. Carter, she said sharply. This is exactly the problem with your generation, with your entitlement. You break something sacred, and you think throwing money at it fixes the character flaw that allowed you to break it in the first place. Powerful. She turned her gaze back to Arthur. Mr. Pendleton, the court is going to award you the $40 for the repair of the box, but that is the absolute least of what will happen here today. Powerful. The courtroom collectively leaned in closer. Judge Judy was known for creative rulings, but the atmosphere suggested something unprecedented was about to unfold. Powerful. Mr. Carter, Judge Judy announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority. You will pay the $40 to Mr. Pendleton immediately. However, you will not simply hand over a few bills and walk away to resume your comfortable life. You will personally hire a master woodworker to repair this mahogany box to its original, pristine condition, and you will pay for every single cent of that professional restoration out of your own pocket. Powerful. The courtroom remained in a stunned hush, but Judge Judy was far from finished. She leaned over the heavy wooden bench, locking eyes with the now humbled young man. But that only addresses the physical damage, she continued, her tone laced with a profound gravity. To address the moral damage you have caused, I am ordering you to perform 100 hours of community service, and you will not be picking up trash on a highway or filing papers in an office. You will spend every one of those hours driving Mr. Pendleton to the Veterans Memorial Park, assisting him in his daily routine. Powerful. Liam's eyes widened, but not in protest. For the first time since he swaggered into the room, he looked genuinely receptive, absorbing the immense weight of his sentence. You will stand beside this American hero, Judge Judy instructed, her voice trembling slightly with raw emotion. You will hold that restored box. You will listen to the letters of those 22 fallen men, and you will read their names aloud to the wind. You will learn exactly what it takes to build the freedom you have so carelessly enjoyed. Powerful. Liam nodded slowly, his voice completely stripped of its previous arrogance and entitlement. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. I will do it. He looked over at Arthur Pendleton, no longer seeing a frail old man in a faded suit, but a towering figure of honor, resilience, and quiet heroism. The illusion of his untouchable privilege had completely collapsed, replaced by a harsh but deeply necessary lesson in character and respect. Powerful. Judge Judy took a deep breath, looking around the silent courtroom one last time. Power and money can buy many things in this world, she said, delivering her final, unforgettable words from the bench. But they can never buy character. Character is what you do for people who can do nothing for you. Mr. Pendleton is the absolute embodiment of character, and it is my greatest hope, Mr. Carter, that by standing in his shadow, you might finally develop some of your own. Powerful. With tears glistening in her eyes, Judge Judy did something she had rarely done in her entire television career. She didn't just bang the gavel to dismiss the court. She gently placed it down, stepped off the high judicial podium, and walked directly over to Arthur Pendleton. The cameras captured the legendary judge shaking the hands of the quiet guardian, bowing her head in a beautiful collision of legal justice and ultimate human respect. Powerful.